hand them to us. That's what it was like. We handed a draft copy and told to go vote. And at the time, there were two votes. One, to give the City of New York emergency billions of dollars. The other, to give the President authorization to respond to the terrorist attacks. And so we filed in to vote with our draft copies. I said to one of my fellow senators, isn't this going awfully fast? And he said, Link, the train's left the station. And so in we filed, and I'm just thinking, the President and the Vice President have been duplicitous with us as Americans throughout the campaign, saying they're going to be uniters, not dividers. They came in with a divisive agenda. They say they're going to be humble with a foreign policy. They did the opposite. I'm having my doubts about whether to trust them at this moment in our history. And so when they called the roll, Chafee is a C, so it's early in the alphabet, I said no. And my fellow senators next to me said, Link, you just voted against the money for New York City. I said, no, I'm voting against the War Authorization Act. Another senator said, no, Link's right, he's voting against the war. No, it's the money for New York City. So I walked down to the well of the Senate to ask the parliamentarian, what are we voting on? And they were arguing. We're voting for the money of New York. No, we're voting for the war authorization. And that's what it was like. They just expected everybody 100 to nothing, 100 to nothing. And who matters what weren't paying attention to what the roll was calling. And before the alphabet got to the end, my staff set the record, the half-mile record for running from the office to the Senate chamber and grabbed me by the lapels and said, you cannot vote against this war authorization. The people are angry. They want to respond. You just can't do this. And I listened carefully to my staff. I weighed what they were telling me with what I was thinking, and I agreed with them. And before the roll was finished being called, I changed my vote to an aye. So it was an aye on both. And out of 100 senators and 435 members of the House of Representatives, here's another question, only one member, that's 535 members of Congress, only one voted against the Afghanistan war authorization. Does anybody remember who that was? No? No? He's got it. Barbara Lee, an African-American woman from Oakland. And as a result, she got death threats. She had to have Capitol Police protection. She was hung in effigy. And so at the time, I'm thinking, whew. And of course, it wasn't soon after that, but that was the climate in which the administration could take advantage. Lots of confusion and turmoil, and that was just ripe for the agenda that they wanted to enact. And again, of course, the Afghanistan effort went very well quickly, and then before we knew it, the President and the Vice President are talking about Iraq and Saddam Hussein. It made no sense in the beginning. And the Middle Eastern leaders came over to the United States. I can remember King Abdullah from Jordan making a beeline over and saying, don't do this. I live in the region. We've got them contained. Nobody listened. And before you know it, senator after senator started peeling off and saying, we've got to stand with the President on this. And it was just unbelievable to see it unfold. The case that Saddam Hussein was a threat and that he had weapons of mass destruction without any evidence start to sink in, especially in the United States Senate. And that's pretty much the premise of my book, that the framers of our Constitution foresaw this. They clearly foresaw a rogue executive, and especially in the United States Senate, where they gave us 6-year terms, where only a third of us are up at any emotional moment, which we were at that time. We're up for election. 2/3 of us weren't. And so it was especially disheartening to see the U.S. Senate fall into line. And don't forget, the Democrats were in control. Jefferson switched, and Tom Daschle was the majority leader. And as a result, there were some heroes through the course of that Iraq War vote. Somebody mentioned Senator Byrd. He was a hero. He stood up there and shouted out from his chair, "Fie on this Congress! Fie on this Congress!" So there's a misconception that everybody thought Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. When I hear that in the media and on the radio shows and on the TV shows, oh, everybody thought, I go apoplectic. No, not everybody thought. Robert C. Byrd didn't think so. Ted Kennedy didn't think so. Barbara Boxer didn't think so. Paul Sarbanes didn't think so. Paul Wellstone, who was up in the fall of '02 when the vote was being taken, he did have an election in November. He voted no. And that's important because don't forget, he was listening to the people of Minnesota. And he wanted to win his re-election, and he was listening to his people. And so everyone was saying, oh, everybody wanted this war vote. He voted no, and he was up in 2002. And unfortunately died in a tragic plane crash right before the election. Of course, the president won that vote overwhelmingly. And the other important aspect of the Iraq war vote, and people forget this, is there were again 2 votes that day. And one was the Levin Amendment, offered by the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, the Democrat from Michigan, Carl Levin. Chairman, what more important committee? The Armed Services Committee. And all that amendment tried to do is slow it down. We're in the middle of a midterm election. The elections are coming up in a few weeks. Let's let the inspectors do their work. Let's work with the UN Security Council. And if we get any new information, this is the Levin Amendment, we'll meet here within 24 hours in the Senate and vote. That was part of his resolution. That lost by the same margin, almost the same margin, as the Iraq war vote several hours later. People were saying no to Levin and aye to war. It was unbelievable performance by the U.S. Senate. And as a result, the Republicans were able to pick up in those midterm elections the seats they needed to get back in control of the U.S. Senate. So in this important time in American history, we went from Clinton, where we had the veto pen, to a 50-50 Senate with Cheney breaking the tie, to Jeffords jumping, bringing the control back to the Democrats, to the Afghanistan vote, the Iraq vote, and then the midterm elections of 2002 that give the Republicans the votes back to get into the majority. And what a time to be seeing the sways of power going back and forth and the important events that are unfolding before our eyes. And of course that brought us into the next cycle, which is the 2003-2004, which is the presidential cycle. And to watch the Bush-Cheney re-election effort unfold, you could see they didn't care about winning by any kind of margin other than 50.001%. And the way they were going to do that was energize the base. And so for that cycle, 03-04, it was abortion, it was drilling in the Arctic Refuge, it was more tax cuts, energized the Bush-Cheney base. At the same time, the Democratic candidate, John Kerry, seemed intent on doing the opposite. He couldn't decide whether he was for the war or against the war. When the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth were blasting him in TV ads, he went windsurfing. It just didn't seem to realize the magnitude of the task at hand and the ferociousness of the intensity of the opposition campaign against him. Should have well known what he was in for. And then finally, when in August of 2000,